Our first guest tonight has done a brilliant job at breaking down step by step and even minute by minute or second by second the testimonies of Special Agent David Lazarus and Officer Harry Dunn and their allegations against the Oath Keepers on January 6th. Joining us now to discuss is the man himself, Steve Baker, an investigative reporter for The Blaze. Steve, thanks for being here tonight.
Hey, Kara, thank you.
Great. So first, before we get into what you've uncovered by really going through these videos with a fine-tooth comb, what is the official narrative that we're supposed to believe when it comes to David Lazarus, him coming in to save, I guess, Harry Dunn from the scary Oath Keepers? What's the official narrative on that before we pick it apart?
Well, the official narrative, of course, is that David Lazarus, special agent who was on the dignitary protection detail for Nancy Pelosi at the time on January 6th of 2021, he was supposed to have seen by his own testimony in the Oath Keepers trial the interaction between 4 Oath Keepers and Officer Harry Dunn 3 or 4 times, quote unquote, and that during those 3 or 4 times that he saw that encounter, that it was a highly contentious and antagonistic encounter, when in fact we know from video evidence now that what the Oath Keepers were doing was actually forming a protective line between him and more agitated protesters at this time. So David Lazarus, Special Agent David Lazarus, was brought in to corroborate a rather shaky testimony by Dunn himself, in which Dunn had changed his actual interview testimony to the FBI from his original interview, where he actually gave and painted a positive interaction with the Oath Keepers. When he was brought in for his second interview, he portrayed it as a negative interaction and that he had to fight them off and keep them from going down these steps to where other officers were receiving first aid. And so because he had that shaky, contradictory testimony between his 2 FBI interviews, they brought in Lazarus to bolster that rather shaky testimony. And of course, Lazarus could not have been there because, as you can see from these video montages that you're showing right now, is we have Lazarus on tape by timestamp from the Capitol CCTV footage itself, that he was actually in another building across the street in a Senate office building, not in the Capitol building itself, when that interaction between the Oath Keepers and Harry Dunn began.
You know, and that's the thing why for so many years, right, they hid from us these videos, these surveillance videos. They cherry-picked a couple videos, and that's all we saw on a loop repeatedly over and over again. Even some January 6th defendants, a lot of them didn't even get the full video evidence, exculpatory evidence for themselves in their own trials. Of course, now recently with the House Speaker, we've had more and more of this released, thankfully. And like you were laying out for us, you know, it really starts to completely unravel what we heard from the official narrative all of these years. So as you start to lay out there, can you explain for us the timeline with Lazarus, David Lazarus? Where was he, and then how does he, if he ever, really gets to Harry Dunn?
Well, he finally does get to Harry Dunn, but he gets there about 6 minutes after the Oath Keepers had already moved away from him and had moved into another part of the building, and in fact were exiting. So the very simple, quick version of the timeline is that at 2:44 p.m. on January 6th, Dunn arrived at the top of what they call the small rotunda or the small house rotunda staircase just off of the Great Rotunda. And that was at 2:44 p.m. And then almost simultaneously to that, one of the Oath Keepers by the name of Ken Harrelson walked into that area and saw that Dunn was highly agitated, that he was carrying an automatic rifle at the time, and that he was rather distressed. And so he heard Dunn talking in very loud, confused tones that they were killing us down there. Dunn was shouting and saying that officers were being carried out by the dozens on stretchers. Of course, that wasn't happening. There was not a single officer carried off on a stretcher that day. But this is what Dunn was saying in his agitated and distressed and confused state at the time. Ken Harrelson noticed that and recognized that as an Army veteran himself, a disabled Army veteran. And so he went over and got 3 other Oath Keepers to come over and form this protective line between him. And he wasn't just de-escalating the crowd, they were de-escalating Harry Dunn as well. It was a mutually protective situation that they had formed this line between the more agitated protesters and between a very distressed officer carrying an automatic weapon.